There were 12 disciples, but Jesus chose 3 to go up the mountain. He didn't take all 12. Peter, James, and John, he took with him on a few other occasions as well. Remember, he asked them to pray with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, as we do during Holy Week. He as well took them into the home of a little girl who was dead, and he raised up from the dead so that they would see this miracle. So it seems that from the very beginning, Jesus is preparing these 3 apostles to be able to bear witness to the other 9 what it is that he had done. That the 12 apostles who reveal to us all that Jesus said and all that he did, who reveal to us in the church all that God reveals, right? That sometimes he chose 3 to bear witness to the other 9, so that those 9 would believe not with their eyes, but by word of mouth. And what makes this trustworthy is that they had all seen Jesus walk on the water, calm the storm with one word, cause the crippled to walk, the blind to see, the deaf to hear and to speak, cast out demons, even raise the dead. They all saw that. And so when these 3 disciples would say, "This is what Jesus showed to us," the other 9 would believe. And so as Jesus gives to the apostles this experience of him and revealing himself to them so that they can reveal it to the world and so that we can believe them. So that we can believe them and trust in God by what they say and by what they do and by what they show us, by what the apostles hand on to the church. That's trustworthy. And Jesus even does this while he's still with them, by choosing 3 to reveal to the other 9. And so he takes these 3 and he goes up the mountain. And, it was just a week before that Peter had, the Lord asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" And then, "Who do you say that I am?" And then after Peter gives his great answer, then Jesus says, "Okay, now the Son of Man has to go to Jerusalem and be put to death." And Peter does what? He stands up and he says, "No way, they're not going to take you." And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." That's a little embarrassing, right? If you're Peter, it's like, "Oh, darn it, I thought I had it, Get behind me, Satan." So Peter's, maybe not on his best. And so he just did that like a week ago. And here they are climbing up the mountain. What does Peter expect? What is Peter anticipating? What are the other 2? What are they anticipating? The beauty of this event, of the Transfiguration, is that no matter what they expected, no matter what they were anticipating, when Jesus revealed himself to them, their expectations were pushed aside. Jesus didn't have to fit into what they expected him to say or what they expected him to do. He never did anyway. But he could reveal himself to them, and they could see and witness and accept what he showed them about who he is and who they are in relationship to him. This is so important because many times people are disappointed in God because he doesn't fulfill their expectations. Well, who said he was supposed to? We're the ones that need to be open to accept God as he is, who he is, and as he comes to us, because he withholds nothing. And as he comes to us, everything he brings is for our benefit and for our good. The Lord doesn't take anything, he gives. And so Jesus shines brightly. The glory of his face, the glory of his clothes are shining brightly. And then Moses and Elijah are appearing there with Jesus on the mountaintop. Now, Moses and Elijah both knew God on the mountaintop. Remember Moses at Mount Sinai? He climbs up the mountaintop, right? And then he goes up there for 40 nights and days, he fasts, and then he goes up into the cloud on Mount Sinai, and there God finally reveals to him the 10 Commandments and writes them on stone and gives them to him. And Moses brings them down. And when the people looked up on Mount Sinai, what they saw was a cloud with light and fire in it. And so here, when Moses and Elijah appear with Jesus and God the Father speaks, what comes down? A cloud. And then there is light. It's a bright cloud that overshadows them. It's funny, years ago when I went to the Holy Land, we went up Mount Tabor, and it was rainy that day. So we got up there, and there were clouds and fog everywhere. It was kind of cool. Thought, oh, this is just like when the apostles were up here. Not exactly, but they didn't get rained on. But anyway. So Moses, he's the lawgiver, right? He's the one that every Jewish rabbi was beholden to. If you were a rabbi and you're teaching, if you say, well, I got this great idea, doesn't this sound great? Nobody had to listen to you. The only ideas that people would listen to you is when you said, I got this from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Rabbi so-and-so, who got it from Moses. That's the only reason why any Israelite would need to listen to what a rabbi says. And so every Jew is beholden to what Moses gives. He's the giver of the law. He received it from God. He spoke to God face to face as one man speaks to another. He knew God in a way that not anybody else did. And then there's Elijah, the great prophet. He called fire down from heaven, remember, on the altars when he was confronting the prophets of Baal. And then after he finished with that great display of God's fire from heaven, all of a sudden the queen says, oh yeah, you kill my priests like that? I'm going to kill you. And so Elijah runs and he's scared, right? And he goes up into the mountain and he hides in a cave, and God reveals himself there. Not in the great fire, not in an earthquake, but in the quiet breeze or the silence. God reveals himself to Elijah. And that's Mount Horeb, which turns out is the same mountain. So Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb are the same mountain in all of Jewish tradition and all of Christian tradition. Every witness is that they're the same mountain. Now, Jesus is not on that mountain. He's on a different one. But nevertheless, he's on a mountaintop with Moses and Elijah, the lawgiver and the great prophet. And standing before Peter, James, and John is their entire heritage. Everything that makes them who they are. Everything that gives them any indication of what their relationship is to God and how God has called their people and how God relates to their people is standing before them in Moses and Elijah and Jesus, who they have come to follow. I remember years ago hearing one person say that they must have been excited, like Peter could have said, oh, I wish I had their rookie cards, right? Moses and Elijah. Then my set would be worth a whole lot, right? For baseball card collectors. But these are the heroes of their heritage. And so these three disciples see this. They see Jesus revealed. They see Moses and Elijah before them. Moses and Elijah give testimony to Jesus. And then God the Father gives testimony to Jesus. Because what happens, Peter, right? Wanting to do something right now, he says, oh, Moses and Elijah and Jesus, let's build 3 tabernacles, right? Let's stay here with the presence of God before us. What happens? Poof, poof. Moses and Elijah disappear, and God the Father says from the cloud, this is my beloved Son, the one in the middle. Listen to him. So we shouldn't be too hard on Peter, right? Because before him was his entire heritage. And if he hadn't said that, how would we know? Right? So we see by the dialogue between Jesus and God the Father here and Peter and the other apostles, we are learning. And it is in their dialogue and their with Jesus and their learning of God that the apostles learn what it is they reveal to us, right? The church has the deposit of faith because of this interaction and because of the apostles trying to learn and see and then be taught. In all of Christian history, the Transfiguration is seen as a moment of hope because Jesus had just told his apostles, I have to go and die in Jerusalem. The Son of Man has to go and be put to death. And in being put to death, The apostles, remember, scattered. Even though Jesus had told them, even though they had seen him do miracles, when time came for the crucifixion, they were so disheartened. They were so distraught. It made no sense to them. It seemed like everything they had given their lives for, everything they were doing, all of a sudden crumbled completely before them. Like, what have we done for the last 3 years of our life if Jesus ends up dead on a cross? They were so disheartened that they scattered. So throughout the tradition of the church, it's always been that the transfiguration is where Jesus reveals himself to them in order that these three, Peter, James, and John, might see the glory of God revealed in such a way that when Jesus is raised from the dead, they can recall that and say, yeah, we saw him like that. And there would be something in their heart so that when God called them again, they would come. Sometimes we can be so distraught, so disheartened, that we can't hear the voice of God, or we don't want to, or we just can't. And so we don't feel like coming back. We don't think we can. We don't know what we come back to because we're so distraught. But the transfiguration reveals to the apostles, these three, who can share it with the other 9, that in fact we have seen Jesus in his glory. And this Jesus risen from the dead is the Jesus that we saw. In our own life, when we go through difficulty, when we ask ourselves, what's going on with the Lord? Where is he? Why isn't he answering my prayers? Or what's happening with my church, right? What's happening with my faith? Why does my faith feel strong like it used to? Why is it that when I pray, it doesn't seem like God answers me the way that he used to? Why does my walk seem more difficult at times? We can ask those questions, and those are part of our walk. Those are part of our walk. Doesn't mean something's wrong. It means we're on the same journey. But in all of that, we can look back and we can remember the apostles reveal the transfiguration, and in our own lives, God has spoken to you. God has given you an experience of him hearing your prayer and answering them. God has come in and changed your life, and there's been people around you who you know whose lives have been changed by Jesus Christ. And you say, their testimony is real. Their testimony is more than acceptable. Their testimony is real. And I can believe it, just like the 9 had to believe the other 3, because they had seen things themselves, so they can receive with credibility and with trust what it is that these 3 apostles, Peter, James, and John, tell them. So it is in our lives. We can receive the testimony of others and say, this is how Jesus meant for it to be. I don't have to see and experience everything in my faith in order for me to receive it. I can receive it from someone else who has experienced it as well. And I can be strengthened by them. And in fact, we can strengthen each other. Remember, Peter, after he denied the Lord 3 times and then was restored to the Lord, and the Lord forgave him, the Lord told Peter, the devil he wants to test you. He wants to sift you out. But I have prayed so that after you return, right? He already knows Peter isn't going to make it. After you return, you will be able to encourage the brothers. And so it is with us in our life when we walk with the Lord, if we are having difficulty, that we can listen to the testimony of others, but also after the Lord brings us back, because he's placed something in our heart that opens us up to the possibility of being called back, that we can then offer that to somebody else for encouragement. So the transfiguration is that for these apostles. C.S. Lewis writes in his book, The Screwtape Letters, which, by the way, I recommend. I love the Screwtape. I love C.S. Lewis anyway. He's one of my heroes. But his letter, The Screwtape Letters, or his book, The Screwtape Letters, it's an imaginary book, right? It's these letters written by a senior demon to a little junior demon. And the senior demon is in charge of the department, and his junior is the nephew. And he's instructing him on how to deceive this particular person he's been assigned to. They refer to him as the victim right? Well, this person ends up becoming a Christian, and the uncle gets really irate at the little nephew for failing in this, but then he begins to instruct him on how to continue to distract him, how to continue to deceive him, even in church, even in prayer, how to do this. It's a very insightful book. It's funny, but it'll hit you right between the eyes on how devil plays with us sometimes. It's a good read. So in this Screwtape Letters, there's a part where after he speaks to Wormwood, the nephew, and says all these things to try and to do, he says, what we want to do is we want to prevent this one thing from happening. And he says, don't think that when the person goes into a dry spell or a time of difficulty that you have them. Don't think that it's because of your work that the person does this. He says, the enemy, God the Father, right? Because they're demons, they refer to him as the enemy, uses these times to strengthen them. And he says, what we don't want is for somebody to get to a point where we've completely lost them. And he says that point happens with this, that even when they are in trial and difficulty, even when they struggle in their faith walk, even when they pray and they don't feel like God hears them, even when they come before the Lord and cry out, why have you abandoned me? They still obey. He says to his nephew, he says, when the person has done that, when the victim does that, you've lost them. And that's what Jesus does here. He gives hope so that even in the midst of trial, even in the midst of difficulty, even in the midst of a dry spell, we still have that spark in us, that gift that he's given us to return to him and to obey. And in that, then, the devil trembles.